The CX-30 was the first time we got to see Mazda's premium philosophy feature on an SUV. This small SUV that uses the same underpinnings as the Mazda 3 small car, Mazda's small product architecture, launched in 2020 in Australia with a real premium flavour to it. There was a much plusher cabin than we're used to from Mazdas from the past, and a new design language, the Kona design language's evolution, to get this really sharp looking little SUV. Now you may have caught our original comparison here at Chasing Cars, where Tom put the Mazda CX-30 up against some true premium competitors, the BMW X1 and the Audi Q3, and it actually did really rather well in top spec form. But we don't have the range topping Astina here today. No, we've got the most affordable one you can get your hands on for under $30,000 before on-road costs if you go for the manual, but we've got the automatic, the Pure. Now some of you may have caught my video about 12 months ago of the previous iteration of Mazda's CX-30 Pure, and you may have heard my criticism that there was a plastic steering wheel, which just felt a little bit penny pinching when you had the rest of that really rather nice plush interior of that car. Well, I'm happy to report that for 2022, Mazda has addressed that criticism, adding a leather steering wheel to this car and a leather gear shifter, among some other product updates for 2022, including adding a mild hybrid engine option to one of the mid-spec grades, the Evolve G20E. But we're not talking about that today. We're readdressing the Mazda CX-30 Pure, the most affordable CX-30 you can get in Australia, and seeing if this car is now perhaps the most complete package, heaps of luxury for not too much money. That may be the case, and of course I'd love to hear your thoughts on the CX-30 in the comments section down below. And if you haven't done so already, I'd also love it if you could hit that subscribe button. Now we happen to think that the CX-30 is one of the most handsome small SUVs in its class, certainly better looking than the better selling Mitsubishi ASX, which has been around for years and years, and I reckon it actually edges out the Volkswagen T-Roc in terms of pure style. The detailing is lovely, you've got these chrome tear ducts here that just make this base model car look really rather expensive. It doesn't look like a base model except for the fact that it's got halogen daytime running lights, but you do get LED headlights on the base car, which is at least great to see, and it helps you see in the dark. Also, the only way you can tell this car apart from the other models in the range is the 16-inch alloy wheels. The Pure is the only grade to get the small wheels, so that should bode well for how it rides. And then down the side, we've got this really cool little S-bend that you see in the flanks of the car that I think is a really nice touch and shows that Mazda is really trying to level up their game in terms of design. But of course, it's subjective, so let me know what you think of this sort of almost coupe-esque affordable SUV in the comment section down below. So around to the rear of the Mazda CX-30 here in Sonic Silver, a very classy colour, if not the most eye-catching one. We open the boot, which is a manual operation here on the base model car. You can pay a bit more extra to get yourself a power tailgate in upper grades, and you can see there's a decent space back here. Mazda says 34 of our budget direct Chasing Cars soccer balls, which is a pretty decent result. However, the rest of the boot isn't that smart. There are no real curry hooks, 12-volt sockets, tie-down hooks, or a storage net included for free. That's all stuff that you get as part of the package when you go for something like a Skoda Kamiq. So it's not hugely practical, but at least you do have a space saver spare tyre under the floor and a lot of foam insulation there to stop sound getting into the cabin, which has hopefully helped, and we'll find out when we get down the road if that is the case indeed. Anyway, let's shut that boot and jump inside the cabin. The cabin design of the CX-30 is perhaps where this car feels at its most upmarket. There's a real slickness to the way that Mazda has carried off the look of the CX-30's cabin that I really like. There are a lot of things shared with the Mazda 3 small car, including a lot of the hard points and the technology, but you get the higher bonnet line that you would expect from an SUV, and you've got a similar amount of headroom between this and the small car. You do sit quite low in this thing though. Obviously I have my seat all the way down because that suits me quite well. You can jack it up if you want. And then in front of you, you get this lovely, beautifully sized, really nicely leather appointed steering wheel now, which just elevates the cabin above and beyond where this base model Pure sat before. It's funny how a little thing like that can really just bring a car's feeling up in your esteem. Just having a nice thing to hold while you're driving, nice leather appointed shifter as well, just makes it feel like a holistic, more complete package than the car it was just last year. So I think Mazda's done a really good job listening to feedback and adding the things that you want in a car like this. And it really means that this doesn't stand out as a clanger in the Mazda premium philosophy range. Instead, it's just a really good way to get yourself into a rather nice little small SUV. Now moving up one step to the Evolve doesn't bring that much extra kit either. You get paddle shifters behind the steering wheel, which is nice. nice if you need it. And you also get 18-inch alloy wheels and dual zone climate control with rear air vents, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So a couple of little extra niceties that would be great if you were living with your family in a CX-30, but if you're just a couple and using the rear seats occasionally or never, or only for a dog or something like that, then actually the Pure is a really complete specification. The seats as well are quite comfortable. They're a little softer than some Germanic competitors, and they don't have the long-term support perhaps, although Mazda does say that they are designed to fit the natural S-curve of your back. And yeah, they're comfortable, and the cloth is actually really nice, high-quality stuff. It doesn't feel like cheap base model cloth. And I should add to that, there's heaps of this Maztex leather padding in a contrasting navy colorway up on the dash top, on the doors themselves as well, which adds a little bit of extra flair to this car's cabin. You even got it on this nice and soft center armrest. This is not something you see in all base models, an armrest that's this soft and comfortable, that's going to make this car a really pleasant companion on longer drives. What about practicalities? Well, it's actually really good here in the CX-30. You've got 2 cup holders ahead of the shifter and a little tray that I've got my sunglasses in. I believe in higher spec cars that becomes a wireless charging pad. And then under this armrest, which slides forwards and backwards, you pull it back and you've got a clever little storage area, a couple of USB ports, a 12-volt socket, and a nice little holder for your phone. So when it's plugged in doing smartphone mirroring, it doesn't annoyingly rattle around in there because there's no USBs out here. They're all kind of hidden quite sweetly in there. Speaking of the technology, this is one of the spots that the CX-30 is either going to be a love it or hate it kind of vehicle. You do have a really crisp looking 8.8-inch screen up here nestled into the dash really nicely. However, it isn't a touchscreen, which is fine when you're interfacing with Mazda software. And you know Tom and I like to go on, and Ponch as well, about how good having a rotary controller is. This sort of BMW-inspired rotary controller system down here works really nicely until you want to use Apple CarPlay. And sometimes you just want to be able to press on the icon you want and have something happen immediately. So it is a little frustrating in that sense, but ultimately the package works really nicely and crisply and looks really sharp when it's displaying Apple CarPlay. The size itself is 8.8 inches, and then in front of me I got a semi-digitized driving display, analog tachometer, analog fuel gauge and temperature gauge, but in the center you've got a lightly customizable digital display that can show the radar cruise control readout, can show that there are cars in front of you and give you updates on things like blind spot monitoring and that sort of stuff. You've also got a digital speedo now as well that does the numbers just as you see them. All great stuff. And then you've got a fantastic head-up display, which we always like to compliment Mazda on because you can see it in Australia with our polarized sunglasses. Even in bright, glary conditions, it works really well. So yeah, the CX-30, if you're sort of getting the gist of it in pure specification, it is a very, very complete package that feels like more luxury in here than you might have expected for your $35,000 drive-away cost. And additionally, to top it all off, the base model sound system in this car isn't totally terrible. It does a decent job of rendering tunes when you've set it up, the parameters up to suit what you're listening to, and I think that's a good thing. You don't need to opt for the really expensive Astina just because the bass stereo is so terrible, and that makes this car feel like a nice, complete package. So in the back seat of the CX-30 Pure is probably where it feels at its most base model. You don't get any rear air vents, which is a bit of a shame when you do get them on the next level up, the G20 Evolve. So if you're going to be carrying passengers in the back here as a rideshare car, as a family car or something like that, regularly, I would say that it's worth the extra money to go for that car. You also don't get any flip down armrests in the base car, although this cloth is quite nice back here. If you want leather though, you're gonna have to spend another $5,000 to get yourself into the G20 Touring. And from there on up, you get electric power adjust for the front seats and leather upholstery everywhere. But honestly, if you have to sit back here, it's not too bad, even with all of that stuff going on and the fact that it's a fairly compact SUV at just under 4.4 meters long. I have a decent amount of headroom, certainly more than I do in a Mazda 3, plenty of tow room as well, and behind my own driving position, my legs are touching the seat in front, but it is nice and soft, so that's actually not too much of a big deal in the grand scheme of things. You do have stuff like hard, scratchy door tops, but at least you've got this nice soft padding here to give your arm a rest on a longer trip, and you've also got plenty of space for roughly 700 milliliters. You could perhaps even fit a 1 litre bottle in there if you were trying hard enough. And finally, it's not really ideal if you need to carry 3 across the bench regularly. The middle seat is quite a lot higher than the 2 outboard chairs, and you have a bit of a hump in the floor for the transmission tunnel for this car, and also there's no USB ports. But if you've got to be back here, it's actually not too uncomfortable. The backrest is supportive, as is the squab, with decent under thigh support. In fact, almost more under thigh support than the front seats have. Fitting the children's seats to the Mazda CX-30 was easier than it is in a Mazda 3, but that's not to say it was particularly pleasant. The coupe roofline does make it a little bit more difficult to get the baby seats into the car. However, the doors at least do open nice and wide and give you a decent aperture. The ISOFIX ports are also not permanently attached to the car, so you could come loose and lose one if you were a little bit careless, and I think there's better solutions to that. And as you can see, in the front passenger seat, in front of the rear-facing baby seat, I'm pretty compromised in my seating position. I couldn't sit here for very long. If I could go lower down, it would be better because my head wouldn't be so close to the roof or actually touching the roof, but unfortunately the front passenger seat doesn't have a height adjust in the base model CX-30 Pure. The Mazda CX-30 isn't as fuel efficient as one of its rivals like the Toyota CHR, which comes with an optional hybrid powertrain. That said, its 6.3 litres per 100 kilometres ADR combined consumption figure is pretty decent. In real world testing, we've seen that hover around 7 to 7.2 litres per 100 Ks in combined running, with that climbing to 8 to 8.5 when you're around town. Servicing needs to be carried out every 12 months or 10,000 kilometres, which is a little bit more regularly than a lot of its competitors. However, the cost is $2,002 over 5 years or 50,000 kilometres of ownership. As for insurance, the median budget direct customer paid $905 to comprehensively insure their new Mazda CX-30 over the last 12 months. Now, your premium may vary based on things that insurers take into account, such as your age, your driving history, and whether or not you garage the car. So, driving the Mazda CX-30 out on the open road, what is this thing like in the real world? Well, I'm happy to report that there's plenty of decent Mazda DNA in there, but it's definitely not quite perfect. There's a couple of aspects about it that feel sort of half generation behind the absolute best in this class. One of those is the 2-litre engine. As good as it is, it makes decent amount of power and torque, so 114 kilowatts of power and 200 newton meters of torque. But this car's pretty heavy. It's a little heavier than the Mazda 3 at 1,475 kilograms is the claimed curb weight. And that means that 114 kilowatts has quite a big job to do to motivate this thing when you need it to go a little bit quickly. So it can feel a little strained. Mazda has tried to disguise quite a lot of that by giving it a sharp throttle response. So by half throttle, you're almost getting absolutely the entire car's performance. And then when you go to full throttle, there's only just a tiny whisker more there to extract. But hey, that is kind of what you expect from a base model small SUV. It's not going to blow anyone's doors off, and you can pay a little bit more money in upper spec grades to get a 2.5 litre engine with 139 kilowatts of power and 252 newton meters of torque that does feel a bit better suited to this car. But the other competitors for this thing, such as the Skoda Kamiq or the Volkswagen T-Roc, or even something like a Hyundai Kona N-Line, do have more grunty, more torquey, turbocharged, downsized engines, which do respond a little bit better when you're out on open roads like this and around towners too. But I will mention Mazda's gearbox tuning, which is really fantastic. It is one of the best in the business, I think. In fact, I'm going to say it, I reckon it's almost as good as BMW does this gearbox tune. The 6-speed automatic may not be the last word in technological innovation, but it does what it can with the torque and power that's available, and it does a really good job of it. It holds gears where you need it to, and it doesn't overly kick down when you give it the full beans. You can go flat out without pressing that last little bit of the accelerator, and it will still hold that gear and give you a nice natural acceleration. Yeah, the engine note is the one thing that does break into the cabin and make this sound a little bit less like a premium SUV, but the NVH isolation is actually really good in this car. It's clearly something Mazda's worked on over the years, especially after that 2 generations ago Mazda 3, which was so famously loud. Even the torsion beam rear suspension of this car is actually pretty well insulated. Now, on that torsion beam suspension, this car uses pretty much the same underpinnings as the Mazda 3 small car, and that means that it does pick up some of that car's sort of slow speed harshness. Now, this base car on its 16-inch alloy wheels does a pretty good job of isolating bigger bumps. There's quite a lot of softness in those sidewalls to suck up larger hits and sharp edge bumps. But sometimes when you're out on a road like this that looks smooth, there is just a little bit of constant fidget to the way that the CX-30 goes about its business, and it can be a little bit tiring on a longer drive just because you're always feeling what's going on in the road surface underneath you. Conversely, that means this car is actually quite a talented performer when it comes to a set of corners. Now, this is something Mazda has been known for some time, but the CX-30 really does step up quite well. It's not as dynamic as a Mazda 3 because it obviously sits quite a lot higher off the ground, 180 millimeters of ground clearance. and that just means that everything feels a little bit more woolly when you turn in, but there is an inherent chassis balance, and if you don't push this thing too hard, you can actually have quite an enjoyable time rolling through a set of corners, enjoying the fact that you're able to keep the speed and maintain a flow. So yeah, I think Mazda's done a pretty awesome job on making this car feel quite dynamic. The only weird thing about the CX-30's dynamics is its steering. Mostly it feels great, and it is really well weighted and quite predictable. And although the rack is a little slower than a car like a Toyota Corolla, it's not bad and you get your head wrapped around it pretty quickly. The issue is that you sometimes get a little bit of rack rattle over mid-corner bumps, and mid-corner bumps in general can upset this CX-30. The other not so great thing when you're around town is this car's visibility. The rear three-quarter visibility is no good. There's so much metal back there that you can lose a whole person in there. And it's the same thing, it's difficult to see out of this driver's mirror, which is concave rather than convex. I'm not sure if that annoys you, but you can let me know if it does in the comment section down below. But at least Mazda's done a really good job with the safety suite of the CX-30. You get stuff like forward AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection. You get reverse AEB, a really crisp reversing camera as well, and adaptive cruise control from this base model up, not to mention blind spot monitoring as well, and the head-up display here. You can pay $1,500 more to get the Vision package, which adds a rather good 360-degree camera and front cross-traffic alert, so junction assist AEB. But in its basic spec, it gets 5 stars from ANCAP, and even the lane keep assist is quite subtle and well tuned. So I think Mazda's done a really good job working on honing the basic safety suite in their cars to a point where you don't need to option the Vision package anymore on this car. As I said again and again, the Pure actually might be the most complete and value-oriented package in the range. So, is the Pure the best variant of CX-30 on sale now? Well, I happen to think if you're looking at the lower end of the range, say not going up to the Touring or the Astina, looking for real premium interior quality fabrics such as leather appointed seats and that sort of thing, then the cloth upholstery and now the leather appointed steering wheel makes the Pure feel like a really complete package. It's also got a decent stereo. It's only that slightly lacking 2-litre petrol engine that might hold you back from going for this base front-wheel drive model with its 6-speed automatic transmission. But honestly, the calibration of that transmission is so good, it really does a good job of harnessing the available power and torque on offer from this vehicle. So I actually happen to think the Pure is a very complete specification package at this end of the Mazda CX-30 range. But of course, I'd love to hear your comments. Let me know down below whether you reckon this is the buy, whether you bought one yourself, or anything more about the CX-30 and its competitors. And of course, I'd love it if you could subscribe below if you haven't done so already. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.